He said, "We're coming home for a real Christmas, Mom." So I baked, I decorated, I waited. The phone call came on the first Tuesday of December, just as the day's light was beginning to fade. It was my son, Daniel. That in itself was an event. We spoke on holidays and birthdays, of course, but a call just to talk was a rarity, a small, polished stone in the quiet river of my weeks. His voice on the other end was full of a bright, unfamiliar energy. He told me about his promotion, about the kids' school projects, and then he paused. I heard him take a breath before he said the words that would change everything. He said, "Mom, we've been talking, Jessica and I, and this year, we're coming home for Christmas. All of us. We don't want another holiday in the city. We want a real old-fashioned Christmas at your house. Just like when I was a kid. Just like when I was a kid." Those 7 words were a key unlocking rooms in my heart I thought I had closed for good. For the last 6 years since my Robert passed and Daniel's family got busier, my Christmases had become quiet affairs. A small Cornish hen instead of a turkey, a single candle in the window instead of a house full of lights. I had told myself it was peaceful, but the truth was, it was lonely. His promise felt like a homecoming, not just for him, but for me. A return to my purpose. I told him, my voice thick with a joy I hadn't realized I was missing, that it would be my greatest gift. The very next day, I started. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. My first stop was the attic. The air up there was cold and still smelling of cedar and thyme. I pulled the string for the single bare light bulb, and there they were. The boxes, an entire history of our family's Christmases, stacked in careful piles. I opened the one labeled ornaments. On top, wrapped in brittle yellow tissue paper, was the glass bird. It was the first ornament Robert and I ever bought together from a dusty little shop in town during our first winter in this house. Its silver paint was flaking its tail feathers thin, but holding it felt like holding my husband's hand. I found the lopsided clay star Daniel had made in kindergarten, his small thumbprint still visible on the back. I found the tiny wooden rocking horse we bought the year his sister Clara was born. Each one wasn't just an object, it was a verse in our family song. That weekend, I drove out to Miller's family farm, the same place Robert and I had gone for our tree every year. The air was sharp and clean with the scent of pine. I walked the rows for over an hour searching for the perfect one. Not too tall, not too sparse. One with branches strong enough to hold the weight of memories. I found it in the furthest corner of the field, a beautiful Douglas fir that looked proud and sturdy. As the young man from the farm helped me tie it to the roof of my car, he smiled and said, "Looks like you're planning for a big Christmas this year, Mrs. Bloom." And I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "Yes," I said, "I certainly am." With the tree standing in its rightful place by the living room window, the house began to feel different. It was no longer just a quiet place for one person. It was a home, waiting. That afternoon, I began the baking. I pulled out my old stained recipe box and found the card I was looking for. The one written in Robert's looping, elegant script. Gingerbread men, the only recipe that matters. Soon the whole house was filled with the warm, spicy scent of cinnamon ginger and molasses. I rolled the dough on the flowered kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had once done his homework, where Robert had read the paper every morning. As I pressed the little gingerbread man cutter into the dough, I could almost hear the echoes of Christmases past. The laughter, the carols on the radio, the sound of my family, all of them safe and warm and together under my roof. For the first time in a long, long time, my house didn't feel like a quiet place for memories. It felt like a place where new ones were about to be made. The week that followed was a blur of joyful purpose. My quiet, orderly house was transformed into a bustling workshop for the creation of Christmas magic. The centerpiece, of course, was the tree. One evening, I put on a record of old carols, the ones with a gentle crackle from the vinyl, and I began the slow, sacred ritual of decorating. Each ornament I unwrapped was a conversation with the past. I hung the fragile glass bird, my first purchase, with Robert near the top, where the light would catch its silver wings. I found the slightly scandalous angel with the chipped halo that my sister and I had always fought over as children, and I gave her a place of honor. I spent hours untangling the lights, testing each bulb, my fingers patient. When I finally plugged them in, the living room was flooded with a warm, steady glow. The tree wasn't just a tree anymore. It was a beacon. It was a promise I was making back to Daniel, a promise that the home he remembered was still here waiting for him. The days took on a rhythm. I planned the Christmas Eve menu with the seriousness of a military general, not just a turkey. This had to be special. A standing rib roast with Yorkshire puddings, just as Robert's mother used to make. Scalloped potatoes, creamy and rich. Green beans with toasted almonds. A cranberry sauce made from scratch, not jellied from a can. I filled a notebook with recipes and shopping lists, my handwriting growing more excited with each page. I set up a wrapping station at the dining room table. I had bought beautiful, thick paper with patterns of holly and winter birds and spools of deep red velvet ribbon. Each gift was wrapped with a librarian's precision, the corners crisp, the bows tied just so. A set of classic novels for my grandson Leo, who had his father's thoughtful eyes. A beautiful watercolor paint set for little Maya, who loved to draw. For Jessica, a silk scarf in a shade of blue I thought would match her eyes. And for Daniel, for my son, I had found a beautiful old compass in a local antique shop with a brass casing that shone like gold. I wanted to give him something that would always help him find his way home. A week before they were due to arrive, I decided to call Jessica just to confirm any food allergies, to ask what the children's favorite cookies were. It was a small, grandmotherly gesture. She answered the phone, sounding distracted, the noise of traffic loud in the background. I could hear her telling one of the children to sit still. When I asked about the menu, she laughed a short, brittle sound. "Oh, Margaret, anything is fine, really," she said. "Don't go to too much trouble. You know how picky the kids can be. We're just excited to see you. Don't go to too much trouble." The words were meant to be kind, I'm sure, but they landed in my heart like a tiny, cool pebble. I had already gone to trouble. Trouble was the entire point. The trouble was the love. I brushed the feeling aside. Of course she was busy. Of course they were excited. I told myself I was being silly, a foolish old woman overthinking things. And to prove it to myself, I plunged even deeper into the preparations, as if my effort alone could reinforce the foundation of the promise. I baked 3 more kinds of cookies. I polished the good silver until it shone each fork and spoon, a tiny mirror reflecting the lights of the tree. I bought new candles for every window and a large festive wreath for the front door. Its pine needles so fresh they pricked my fingers. By the 22nd of December, the house was ready. It was perfect. The air itself felt thick with anticipation, with the scent of pine and cinnamon and beeswax. Every surface gleamed. The fire was laid in the hearth, ready to be lit. Presents were stacked beautifully beneath the tree. I stood in the doorway of the living room that evening, just looking. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a snow globe, a perfect self-contained world of Christmas warmth. It was a promise waiting to be kept. I had done my part. All that was left to do was wait. The morning of the 23rd arrived with a sky the color of pale pearl and a fresh dusting of snow on the pine trees. I woke before dawn, my heart thrumming with an energy that felt like youth itself. Today was the day. My family was coming home. I moved through my house like a happy ghost, making everything perfect for their arrival. I put fresh, crisp sheets on the beds in the guest rooms, a sprig of holly on each pillow. I simmered a pot of cider on the stove with cinnamon sticks and cloves, letting the warm, sweet scent fill every corner of the house. I lit a single thick candle on the mantelpiece, a small, flickering beacon of welcome. The preparations were finally complete. All that was left was the giddy heart, thumping anticipation. Have you ever felt that happiness so bright and fragile, you're almost afraid to breathe for fear of breaking the spell? That was me that morning. I sat in my armchair by the fire, a book open on my lap that I wasn't reading, just watching the clock, listening for the sound of a car turning into the driveway. They were due to arrive in the late afternoon. As 2 o'clock became 3, my pleasant anticipation began to curdle just slightly into a nervous anxiety. I told myself it was just traffic from the city. At 4, when the winter sun was already beginning its low golden descent, I started looking out the window at every car that passed. At 5, the streetlights flickered on, and the beautiful warm glow of my decorated house began to feel less like a welcome and more like a lonely stage. The shadows in the living room grew long, stretching across the floor like dark, grasping fingers. The silence, once peaceful, was now heavy. It was a listening silence waiting for a sound that wouldn't come. The phone finally rang just after 10 o'clock at night. The house was so quiet that the sudden shrill sound made me jump. I saw Daniel's name on the screen, and a wave of pure relief washed over me so powerful it made me dizzy. They were safe. They were just late. I picked up the phone, my voice ready with forgiveness. But it was not the voice of my son, tired from a long drive, that greeted me. It was a voice I knew, but it was different. It was stretched thin, with a false, frantic cheerfulness. He was talking too fast. He told me there had been a change of plans. He told me Jessica's boss had offered them a last-minute opportunity. They just couldn't refuse a company-paid ski trip to a chalet in Switzerland. He said the word Switzerland as if it were a magic spell that should dazzle me into understanding. He said the kids were so excited that they had already looked up pictures of the mountains. He said they just couldn't say no to an experience like this for them. He said he was so sorry. He said they would make it up to me that we would do a late Christmas in January. He told me to have a very merry, cozy Christmas, and then he was gone. I don't remember hanging up. I was just left holding the silent phone in my hand, the dial tone a dull, empty hum in my ear. He hadn't been apologizing for breaking his promise. He had been seeking my permission to have never meant it in the first place. I stood up and walked slowly through my perfect festive house. The gingerbread men on the counter seemed to smile at me mockingly. The beautiful tree twinkling with the lights I had so carefully strung cast long, lonely shadows on the walls. The presents stacked beneath it were no longer tokens of my love. They were monuments to my foolishness. It's a strange and terrible thing, isn't it, to be left alone in a room full of love you prepared for other people? I walked to the fireplace, to the single thick candle I had lit that morning, as a beacon of welcome. I leaned in close, its flame warm on my face. Then, with a slow, steady breath, I blew it out, plunging the room into a deep, quiet darkness, lit only by the indifferent glow of the lights on the tree. The promise wasn't just broken, it had never been real. And my perfect old-fashioned Christmas had arrived. It was just for one. Christmas Eve was the longest night of my life. I moved through the silent, festive rooms of my house like a ghost. I didn't have the heart to unplug the tree, so its cheerful lights continued their pointless blinking in the dark. I mechanically covered the trays of cookies with tin foil. I put the magnificent rib roast seasoned and ready into the cold refrigerator. Each action felt heavy, like I was moving through water. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own bed, the one I had shared with Robert for so many years. Instead, I curled up on the living room sofa, pulling an old Afghan over myself, and stared at the dark shape of the Christmas tree until the blackness outside my window finally softened into the gray light of dawn. I woke on Christmas morning to a profound and deafening silence. The house was cold. For a moment, I let the full weight of the disappointment settle over me. The emptiness of the rooms, the stillness where there should have been the sound of children's laughter, the ache in my chest that was sharp and real. I could have stayed there all day, a prisoner in the beautiful jail I had built for myself. I could have let the grief win, but then as I walked into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, I didn't want I saw it. The counter was laden with the feast I had prepared. The bowls of potatoes waiting to be scalloped, the crisp green beans, the deep red cranberry sauce, the pies and cakes, and dozens upon dozens of gingerbread men, all of them waiting for a celebration that would never happen. All of that work, all of that care, all of that love just sitting there with nowhere to go. You know what's a funny thing about love? When you pour it all out and it has nowhere to land, it doesn't just disappear. It just waits for a new direction. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. A new thought, small and quiet, at first, but insistent. I would not let this love spoil. I would not let this effort be for nothing. My son and his family may not have needed my Christmas, but somebody somewhere did. I went to the phone book and found the number for the St. Jude's Community Church downtown. I knew they hosted a dinner every year for those who had nowhere else to go. A woman with a tired but kind voice answered. I asked if they were still in need of volunteers or food donations. She let out a short, weary laugh. Honey, she said, it's Christmas morning. We are in need of everything. That was all I needed to hear. A new energy, a fierce and focused purpose surged through me. I spent the next 2 hours in a whirlwind of activity, but this time it was different. There was no wistful nostalgia, only practical efficiency. I found every plastic container and disposable foil pan I owned. I packed up the rib roast. I scooped the potatoes into a large casserole dish. I arranged the cookies and pies into sturdy boxes. My hands, which had felt so heavy and useless just hours before, were now steady and quick. I was no longer preparing a meal for a memory. I was preparing a meal for a need. I loaded my car until the back seat and the trunk were completely full. The car was packed, just as I had hoped it would be for Christmas, just not with the people I had expected. As I pulled out of my driveway, I glanced back at my house. The wreath was still on the door. The windows were dark and a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the roof in white. I was leaving the ghost of Christmas past behind. I was driving towards something real. The church basement was chaotic, steamy, and loud, but it was warmer than my silent home had been. The air smelled of roasting vegetables and strong coffee and damp wool coats. A handful of volunteers rushed about their faces, tired but determined. I had cooked a feast for a family who wasn't there. But as I started unloading the boxes from my car, a feeling began to grow in my chest. A feeling that I was about to find one that was. The woman who greeted me at the church basement door was named Esther. She was a small, wiry woman in her 80s, with hands that had seen a lifetime of work and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She simply looked at the boxes of food I carried in, then looked at me and said, "Well, look at that. An angel with a rib roast. We can use that. Kitchen's in the back. Grab an apron, we're already behind." Her no-nonsense attitude was a strange kind of gift. There was no room for self-pity in Esther's kitchen. There was only work to be done. She put me on a station next to a quiet, older gentleman who was diligently pouring coffee into styrofoam cups. He had kind eyes and a neatly trimmed white mustache. He introduced himself as Arthur Henderson. We worked side by side for the next hour, a comfortable silence between us, punctuated only by the clatter of pans and Esther's occasional orders from across the room. The physical work was grounding, slicing the warm, fragrant roast, mashing potatoes in a bowl so large it took all my strength to hold it steady, arranging the gingerbread men on platters, their little candy eyes seeming to smile up at me with a new purpose. My hands, which had felt so empty the night before, were now full. My heart, which had felt so heavy, began to feel lighter with each task. When the doors opened at noon, a steady stream of people flowed in from the cold. There were families with children whose coats were a little too thin, their faces bright with excitement. There were elderly men who sat alone, their shoulders slumped with the weight of remembered Christmases. There were people of all ages, all stories, all brought together by a shared need for warmth and community. I stood behind the serving line, spooning out potatoes, my arm working in unison with Arthur's as he served the green beans. A young mother came through the line holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5. The girl's eyes, wide and serious, fixated on the platter of gingerbread men. When it was her turn, I placed an extra cookie on her plate. The mother looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and whispered, "God bless you, ma'am. You've made her day." Isn't it funny how sometimes the smallest kindness from a stranger can heal a wound you didn't even know was still bleeding? I worked through the afternoon, losing track of time. I refilled platters, I poured gravy. I smiled until my face ached. I learned that Arthur had been volunteering here every Christmas since his wife Eleanor had passed away 6 years ago. He told me it was better than staring at the 4 walls of an empty house. I told him I understood completely. We didn't need to say more. We were 2 strangers who understood the particular shape of each other's silence. As the last guests left and the volunteers began the monumental task of cleaning up, Esther came over and placed a firm, warm hand on my shoulder. "You've got good hands, Margaret," she said. "You're welcome back any time." It wasn't a compliment. It was an invitation. An invitation into a community I hadn't known I was looking for. I drove home as the evening snow began to fall again, thick and soft. The car was empty now, smelling faintly of roasted meat and sugar. The streets of my town were quiet, the windows of the houses glowing with warm, festive light. This time, they didn't look lonely to me. They just looked beautiful. My own house was dark and quiet as I entered, but it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a haven, a place of rest after a long day's good work. I was too tired to even make tea. I simply sat in my armchair in the dark, the day's events washing over me. And then the phone rang. I saw the caller ID and my heart leaped. It was my granddaughter Clara calling from her college dormitory. She must have known somehow. Her voice was a balm full of the fierce protective anger that only the young can truly muster. She had spoken to her mother. She knew about the trip to Switzerland. She was furious on my behalf, and hearing her anger strangely soothed my own. I didn't tell her about my night of grief. Instead, I told her about my day. I told her about Esther and her commanding voice, about Arthur and his quiet kindness, about the little girl and the gingerbread man. I told her how the food I had made with so much love had found the right home after all. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Clara said, her voice soft with wonder, "Grandma, that's the most you thing I've ever heard. Taking a broken promise and turning it into a feast for strangers." When we hung up, I sat in the quiet darkness, the lights of the Christmas tree casting gentle patterns on the ceiling. The pain of my son's choice hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer the sharp, gaping wound of the night before. It had become something smaller, something manageable. It was a scar, a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had found in its place. The day after Christmas, known as Boxing Day, has always been a day for putting things away. This year, it felt more symbolic than ever. I woke to a world blanketed in fresh snow, the silence outside matching the quiet in my own heart. I moved through my house with a slow, deliberate purpose. I took the ornaments off the tree one by one, wrapping each in its tissue paper coffin, a gentle farewell to the Christmas that wasn't. The last things left on the mantelpiece were the stockings. There was one for Robert, which I always hung, one for me, and the one I had stitched for Daniel when he was a boy, his name, in slightly crooked red thread. I held it in my hands for a long time, the felt soft and worn. I remembered the boy who had once believed so fervently in magic, the boy whose world was not complete without his mother at its center. I wondered when that boy had been replaced by a man who could so easily trade his mother's heart for a week on a ski slope. I didn't throw the stocking away. That would have felt too angry, too final. Instead, I folded it carefully and placed it in a box labeled Memories, alongside the glass bird and the clay star. I was not erasing my son from my past, only removing him from his place of honor in my present. That act, so small and quiet, led to a larger one. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I had never done before. I opened my old file box and I took stock. Not of my feelings, but of my finances. I laid out the bank statements from the last 10 years. It's a difficult thing, isn't it, to look at love through the cold, hard lens of a bank statement. But sometimes it's the only way to see the balance clearly. I saw the checks I had written to help with the down payment on their first house. The wire transfers to help cover my grandchildren's private school tuition when Daniel was between jobs. The countless smaller amounts for summer camps, new tires, a broken water heater. I had never thought of it as a debt they owed me. It was just what a mother did. You see a need and you fill it. You give. But looking at the long, neat columns, I saw a pattern not of mutual support, but of a one-way street. I had been a safety net, a silent, reliable investor in a life I was rarely invited to fully participate in. The next morning, I called my financial advisor a practical woman named Carol. I explained in a calm voice that surprised even me that I wanted to make some changes. I told her to stop all the automatic monthly transfers to my son's account. I instructed her to take a significant portion of my portfolio and place it into a new educational trust fund, with my granddaughter Clara as the sole beneficiary. Carol was professional. She asked no prying questions, simply stated the facts, and followed my instructions. Each decision felt like a stone being placed in a new solid wall around my own future. A wall built not to keep others out, but to keep myself safe within. Daniel called 2 days later. His voice was relaxed, full of the easy confidence of someone who has just returned from a wonderful vacation. He asked how my Christmas had been. The question was so oblivious, so utterly lacking in self-awareness that I almost laughed. I told him it had been very quiet. Then I told him I had spent the day at the St. Jude shelter. There was a silence on his end. "Oh," he said finally. "Well, that was nice of you." He tried to steer the conversation back to the ski slopes. The beautiful snow, a funny story about little Maya. He was trying to smooth it over to pretend his promise had been a casual suggestion, a trifle I had surely forgotten. But I did not forget. I waited for him to finish. Then I said, my voice as calm and quiet as the falling snow outside my window. "Daniel, we need to talk about the trust you have in me." He was confused. "The trust? What trust?" "The one that assumes I will always be here," I said. "That my home is a hotel you can book or cancel at your convenience. That my time, my effort, my love are all just resources on standby. That trust has been depleted." He was silent then. I could hear his breath on the other end of the line. "Mom," he said, and his voice was suddenly smaller. "You're angry. I get it. We messed up." "This isn't about anger," I replied. "It's about balance. The love I have for you, the love of a mother for her son, that is bottomless. But the automatic, unquestioning financial support, the expectation that I will always be waiting in the wings, that has to be earned back. The books need to be balanced." I don't know what he had expected. Shouting, perhaps. Tears. An argument he could win. But he had no defense against my quiet clarity. We ended the call a few minutes later, not with a resolution, but with a new reality established between us. I hung up the phone and felt no sense of victory, only a somber, painful, and absolutely necessary peace. The conversation was over. The pattern was broken. My own front door was finally, truly my own. The days after my final call with Daniel were quieter than any I had ever known. It wasn't a lonely quiet or an angry quiet. It was a clean quiet. The quiet of a slate that has been wiped clean, ready for something new to be written. The Christmas decorations were all packed away, the scent of pine and cinnamon, replaced by the familiar, comforting smell of old books and lemon polish. My house was no longer a stage set for a play that had been canceled. It was simply my home again. I found myself making new small routines, I called Arthur Henderson, the kind gentleman from the shelter, and we met for coffee at the town diner. We talked for 2 hours about his late wife's garden and my late husband's love for the piano. It was a friendship born not from a long history, but from a shared, quiet understanding of the present. I started volunteering at the library once a week, surrounded again by the peaceful hush of stories waiting to be discovered. I was building a life made of small, sturdy things. A week into the new year, a package arrived. It was from Clara. Inside, I found a beautiful empty photo album. The first page had a single note written in her familiar, thoughtful script. It said, "For all the new memories we are going to make Grandma. Starting now." And tucked inside was a train ticket for her to visit me during her spring break. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a promise, the kind that gets kept. That evening, I sat at my desk, the empty photo album open before me. I thought about all the plans I had made for others over the years. Vacations I had helped fund, homes I had helped secure, futures I had quietly invested in. I had been the reliable bedrock, the steady shore for everyone else's ships. My own dreams, my own quiet wishes for travel and adventure had been packed away like old ornaments stored in a box labeled "Someday." Perhaps you have a quiet dream of your own, one you've packed away in a similar box. I'm here to tell you that someday is not a day of the week. It's a choice. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a bright glow in the dim room. I didn't search for flights for my family. I didn't look up resorts for my grandchildren. I typed a single word into the search bar: Vienna. The city of music. The city Robert and I had always dreamed of seeing in the springtime when the gardens were in bloom and the concert halls were full. I had spent a lifetime teaching the music of Mozart and Beethoven. It was time to go and walk the streets where they had walked. My fingers didn't tremble as I browsed the travel websites. They were steady. I found a small, charming hotel on a quiet side street. I booked a flight for the first week of April, when the cherry blossoms would be painting the city in pink and white. I paid for it with the money that would have otherwise gone to my son, a quiet reallocation of resources from a past that no longer served me to a future that would. The moment the confirmation email appeared in my inbox, I felt a click of final perfect settling in my soul. The promise that was broken last Christmas wasn't a tragedy. I see that now. It was a key. It was the harsh, necessary sound that finally unlocked the door to my own life. I was not abandoned. I was set free. My life is not a story of what was taken from me, but of what I chose to build when my hands were finally my own again. The music is not over. It is simply a new movement in a different key. And it is beautiful. If you are listening to this and if you feel that your own music has faded into the background, I hope you hear this. It is never too late to pick up the baton. It is never too late to turn the page. Your story is waiting for you. And if you decide to write it, I'll be right here listening. Thank you for sharing this time with me, for listening to my story. I hope it serves as a reminder that it's never too late to become the author of your own life. If my journey resonated with you in any way, or if it brought a memory or a feeling to mind, I would be so honored if you would share your thoughts in the comments below. I believe the wisdom we share with each other is what makes a community feel like family. And if you know someone who might need this message of hope and courage, please feel free to share my story with them. This channel, Granny Stories, believes in the power of these conversations. To hear more stories like mine every week and become part of this wonderful family, please consider subscribing. I am so grateful you were here to listen.